Welcome to today's Board of Directors agenda meeting for July 30th, 2019. This is our opportunity to review the agenda for our formal board meeting that will be held on August the 6th, 2019. We can now proceed with the review of our proposed agenda. Board members, are there any questions regarding items 1 through 6?
I have one item, please.
Director Adcock.
Mr. Moore, I have a question on items 6, 7, and 9, please. Item 6, I wanted to know why we're going over what the original amount was.
Sure, Mr. Honeywell.
Are we talking first with item 6, Director Adcock? Okay.
Mr. Honeywell, can you tell me why we need an increase in the amount and what was the original amount?
Yes, ma'am. Mayor, Vice Mayor, board members, Director Adcock. The original contract was for $49,000. That is something that can be approved. It's under the board threshold for approval. At this point, as we proceed with acquiring more right-of-way and more easements for our sales tax and bond capital program, we realize that this contract is going to be over that $49,000 amount. We have $400,000, and at this time we don't anticipate spending that much, but we'd like to have that cushion in the contract.
A $49,000 contract, and we're upping it to $400,000.
Yes, ma'am.
That's quite a bit of increase. Did we think about increasing it at a smaller amount, or why did we go the whole $400,000?
Well, we would prefer not to have to come back multiple times for the same contract to keep increasing it.
Okay, so it's capped now at $400,000.
Yes, ma'am.
So are they going to do all of our acquisitions for us?
They are assisting us in acquisition, so they may not be doing all of them. Staff might be doing some of those, but when we do appraisals, when we do negotiations, they are assisting us with.
Since they got this contract at $49,000, was it a bid?
It's a professional service, so there are no bids.
So there was no bid on this?
No, ma'am. We do a request for qualifications, which is for items that are deemed professional services. We have companies submit based on a request that has itemized things that we would like them to provide in a professional capacity. We have companies that submit their statements that list their qualifications to do that work. Then we select someone out of those people that submitted qualifications to do that work, and then we negotiate a contract with them after that.
But, you know, if I'm sitting here and you have a request out for $49,000, and I don't want to fool around with anything that small, and all of a sudden that $49,000 becomes $400,000, I wondered if we won't have some businesses have a question about that.
Money is no consideration in request for qualifications.
Okay.
Money is not considered at all. There are no
Okay.
prices submitted. It's purely based on the qualifications of the company submitting their response.
Is number 7 yours also?
No, ma'am.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Director Adcock, item 7 is a grant that we received from the state through the Arkansas Department of Transportation Alternative Grant Program. We are matching it from the city, a total of $384,000, but again, the majority of the dollars come from the state grant, and this is to provide ADA access at the zoo.
Okay, I noticed that under number 7, you do not give where the money's coming from, and usually we see where the money's coming from, the $384,000.
It's listed there, at least on your agenda, but
3/8. So it's,
in the fiscal impact section.
okay. So it is not 796, but 384,000.
Correct.
Okay. And the other one, Mayor, I have is number 9.
Yes, ma'am.
I guess I'm just an old record, but last time it looks like the first thing I started talking about was us getting something on our desk before we hear anything about it. And this is another one of those things that I've not heard except from a couple citizens. Mr. Moore, does this contain styrofoam also?
And 1 second, Director Adcock. I just want to explain the process. And the process is anytime that an individual proceeds, whether it's a board member, whether it's staff, the first place for an item to be made is through the agenda process. So this process now is being forth on the agenda. We're here to discuss it here. And then after the discussion, we then have another 7 days to review and ask questions before it goes up for a board vote. That is the traditional process.
Well, it's nice, Mayor, if we have something before we put it on the agenda, should tell us that this is coming or what it's about or something, because once we leave here today and we get something next Friday, we do not have time to listen to staff and to other people answer our questions.
But you do have another week to read the ordinance, to ask questions of staff. I mean, you have 7 days.
Well, I prefer to get mine a week before that. Thank you.
No problem. Thank you. Director Wright? Well, actually, it was Director Richardson.
I'm sorry, my question wasn't answered.
Oh, what do you mean? What was your
My
question again?
question was, Ms. Moore, does this also contain the styrofoam cups and plates and carryouts?
Let me ask our recycling coordinator, Melinda Glasgow, to come forward.
Okay.
And
Mayor, Bruce, the board. Yes, Director Adcock, it does include styrofoam. That is one of the several items for single use that is being considered. And basically, this is just asking for a task force to be put together to determine all of the items and identify all of the items that we will bring back to you for discussion in December.
Okay, and the group is not going to come back until December?
December is when we will present our findings.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Director Richardson?
Thank you, Mayor. Back to a couple that Joan mentioned. On number 9, we're doing an impact study, correct? We're not necessarily making a particular recommendation. We just our desire, a resolution to move forward an impact study. And back on number 6, John, I think you made reference to discretionary amount. I do believe that falls within the city manager's office, discretionary amount spending limit. I think you made reference to the 49,000. That falls within your discretionary.
the initial amount, correct, but not the 400,000.
Right, but the 400,000, the difference between an RFQ and an RFP goes to the lowest responsive bidder, and RFQ goes for the most qualified applicant, and then after they get that bid, then we negotiate the price with them for the work to be done.
That's
So just a point of clarification for those who are listening and those who are in the audience tonight to understand the difference in how we got to this amount.
Thank you so much, Director Richardson.
Thank you, ma'am.
Director Wright?
Yes, Mayor. Item 4, if Mr. Honeywell will give me an update on our status there. This is the Canis Road improvements. And I had a question about number 6.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Director Wright, item number 4 is the next phase of the Canis Road construction. This will go from just west of Embassy Suites to Bowman. It's where the construction ends now. This will continue the construction on to Bowman. So it's the middle portion of the 3 portions of Canis that we have designed right now.
Okay.
And then we'll also be putting out the last section of Canis, which is from Bowman to
Gamble.
Gamble. That will be going out for bid in August.
Okay.
So we should be bringing that next contract hopefully to y'all sometime in September for approval.
And how long do you estimate this phase to be?
It's probably not going to be as long as the one we're in right now, just because the length is not quite as long, and the earthwork, the dirt work that we had to do with this phase we're constructing now is pretty extensive, as I'm sure you're aware of. This section is not quite as extensive, so the construction time frame probably won't be quite as long, but it'll still be probably 9 months to a year.
9 months to a year?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And then on number 6, this is the group that does they meet with the property owners and appraise the properties that are along,
Any of our capital projects we're doing, that they assist us in gaining the right-of-way, acquiring right-of-way, easements, those kind of things that we need to construct the projects.
so for the Canis project, have all of the appraisals been done, and, or are we still negotiating, or?
We are still working on some parts of, I believe there are some that still need to be closed out, but I believe we've appraised everything on the Canis project. That's why we're going to construction, for contracts.
Okay. Mr. Moore, can you get me a report, or Mr. Mayor, I think this is the department that's under you now, right? I'd like to, I keep getting emails about a particular site, Angle Salon. And, can you give
I
me an
can
update?
probably address, that is property that we are currently in the process of using eminent domain to acquire the property, but we are still negotiating with the property owner as far as acquiring the property. But that's what you've been getting emails about. So that's been, appraisals have been done, multiple appraisals have been done, and there's been a lot of conversation back and forth between the city and that property owner.
Okay, when you say multiple appraisals, we did an appraisal, we approached them, they rejected. Did they do their own appraisal?
They have.
Okay, and did we compare them? Were they so far out of line that we couldn't negotiate?
Well, sometimes the negotiation for the property takes a while,
And there's certain
this-
things, just because we're in a particular legal discussion right now, that Mr. Honeywell can't discuss.
Right.
But I can share, Mr. Honeywell and his team has been dealing with this particular issue for the past few years, and so I think it may come to a resolution soon.
Okay, but just for the audience's sake and those listening, when we use eminent domain, we do give them the appraised value of their property, is that correct?
for the property that we are trying to acquire. We put that money in. If we, I don't know how to best explain this. If we have someone that doesn't agree with the price that we offer, we put money in escrow through the court. And once that eminent domain is registered with the court and the judge accepts that, that money is put in escrow with the court until such time as the court can determine what is a fair value for the property, if we can't come to an agreement with the property owner. So we've put money in escrow, and we gain access and ownership of the property at that time. The only thing that's left to decide by the courts is the price that we're going to pay for that property.
Okay.
So that's where we are with that particular case you were talking about. We're still trying to negotiate and not end up in court, but
But if you use eminent domain, you do have to go to court, is that?
not necessarily.
Not
Not
necessarily.
if you come to an agreement between the property owner and the city prior to being in court, it just goes away, and we have an
But from
agreement.
what I'm
for the-
hearing, that's not going to happen, so.
that-
Again, there's some things that's going on right now that may come to a resolution soon. May.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Director Webb?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just wanted to clarify for Director Adcock that on last year when we talked about the city sort of leading the way on styrofoam and not using styrofoam in city buildings and things like that, we did talk some about plastic bags at that time, and one of the people who brought that up, and Director Wright and I were talking about this on our bus tour. And so there have been other cities that have taken steps to either ban plastic bags or charge a nickel fee. And recently in Fayetteville, they passed a similar resolution, which would be a study, and it's a balance. It would be a balance committee with both users and folks from sustainability. And if they get finished before the end of December, that would be great, but we didn't want to rush them. And while we were able to get it ready last Friday, it's something that the Sustainability Commission, we've had plastic bags on our roadmap for quite a few years, so I hope that people will be supportive of this because by passing this, we're not taking a position one way or another. We're just asking that we take a look at it and we get users and advocates for for and against together to look at and recommend, come back and recommend our next steps to us. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Director Webb. Director Adcock.
Yes, Mr. Moore, I'd like to have a copy of the Fayetteville ordinance, please. Thank you.
Seeing no other questions from items 1 through 9, before we go to the first quarter financial report, Director Campuris has an item to discuss.
I'd like to add for discussion for next week a proposal that we consider meeting at 4 o'clock before our regular city board meeting to have the opportunity to discuss policy issues. And it would be an informal discussion where we just do it, and this is to put it on the agenda so we can talk about it.
Director Hendricks.
There you go. Yeah, please. One of the things you would like to talk about and have talked about all the time is residency for the police. And this would give us the opportunity to have an informal meeting where we sit down and really talk about it and talk about the pros and cons of what's happening. And we've got a lot of issues coming up that are big issues. Our insurance policy, the jail, things like that. And this gives us the opportunity for anybody that wants to come to sit down, spend an hour, hour and a half talking about it, and not make any decisions, but have the ability to talk about it and have some staff there to do it.
So would we be talking to business people because working people couldn't be here for?
Well, I'm one of the working people. And I'll make my calendar where I come every Tuesday at 4 o'clock. If it's for the agenda meeting, then I'm going to leave here probably in the next 30 minutes. If it's for the city board meeting, then I'd meet for an hour and a half, have dinner, go to our meeting, and move on with life.
Okay. Is this what you're sending around?
Yes, ma'am. And all this does is just puts it on the agenda to talk about. That's all it does for today.
As long as you talk about at-large positions, I'm for you.
Director Richardson.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Dean, I'm glad you put that last caveat on that as long as we can be here. I think that the presentation runs in stark contrast with Joan just made reference to with respect to recycling. It's in stark contrast when you did the CRB recommendation. I'm glad, Dean, you added that last piece. As one of the not working people, I can be there if I choose to, but I want to clarify that Director Hendricks has made residency requirement. She's had an ordinance for all city employees with respect to the Vision Little Rock tax in 2011 that was passed. And I think she sponsored an ordinance for the following year that suggests that those who were employed after that tax had to live in the city of Little Rock. And I thought what was interesting to me, most interesting to me, was a comment from the chamber spokesman that night. He said they've had unprecedented success in bringing jobs to Little Rock, not for Little Rock. So to Little Rock means they can be filled by people from Conway, Benton, Bryant, all over. So I think just a point of clarification, Dean, Irma's ordinances with respect to residency requirement just wasn't limited to police officers. It was tied to a sales tax that we marketed in 2011, said we're going to bring more jobs to Little Rock and we're going to improve public safety, et cetera, and et cetera. And it was passed, and when it was passed, I think there was ardent opposition to the requirement of those new employees being hired from that tax having to live in this city. And what I found most interesting was the comment from the chamber representative that night was they've had unprecedented success in bringing jobs to Little Rock, not for Little Rock. So to Little Rock can mean they can be filled by people who don't live in Little Rock. So I think you have that kind of oxymoron in my mind in terms of how we move forward with how we present sales tax and how we implement those sales tax.
Thank you, Director Richardson. Vice Mayor Wyrick.
Thank you. Director Campuris, in regards to, I know we'll have more discussion on Tuesday, but are you proposing to do this every other Tuesday, every Tuesday that we have a board meeting? And if so, who prepares the agenda for topics of discussion? Because if we're going to have discussion about stuff, then we probably want to be somewhat prepared for it, because even though we may be experienced in some topics, we don't know about everything unless it's Joan and she knows about everything. But who would be, these are just questions to try to bring to the table next week. Who would be in charge of the agenda? Who would be in charge of letting us know what the topics are? Have you thought through that? What's your thoughts? Turn him on.
Yes, to push it.
You got to press your button.
I think that's fluid, BJ. My inclination is that letter I sent out, there's 4 or 5 areas that I'd like to discuss. And I think that we would put this out far enough where we ask staff that tell people what the things we want to discuss. We could go around the room and say, these are the things I'd like to have on to talk about.
Somebody will have to take charge because, you know, we
And
might,
that'll
we
be-
might
yeah.
backslide a little bit.
Just
and-
so everyone is aware, anytime there's a board, I am the chairman of this board, so if this is passed, that those agenda items will be sent to the mayor's office, and we'll prepare the agenda to make certain we do things in decent and in order.
Perfect. Okay. Thank you.
But there is and here's part of the reason that I think it's important we do this. We, at least on paper, we talk about that this meeting is the meeting we talk about policy. But we talk about policy if there's a resolution or an ordinance on here to talk about. And we don't talk about it in a broad sense where we can really try to find a third or fourth or fifth way of doing something. So we have something that's presented here, and we look at it. And I think what Kathy's resolution to study something is really what I'm talking about. We could say that we want to look at an issue, and then we talk about it, and we say we need some more information, or we're going to set up a study group, or we're going to do something else. And if we start doing that, we're really talking more about policy. When we talk about policy here, in my opinion, we talk about an individual thing that one of us puts on,
Right.
not generalized issues that confront the whole community. And that's what I think we ought to be doing. To me, it'd be a policy board. Our job, I think, from what Tom and Frank have said, is with Frank to make the policy, and then we direct that to his office to deliver those, what we say. Isn't that correct?
Our board, I have the unique ability of both being a board member and the chief executive officer. From that standpoint, each individual board member can advocate policies that are up for a board vote. And once those policies are voted on and or approved, it is up to the chief executive officer, whether it's his or her policy, to execute what the board has approved. A great example, the chief executive officer prepares the budget. Once we go through a budget discussion and the budget is then approved, the chief executive officer then carries that out. Now, the chief executive officer might have his or her own different particular policy initiatives to pursue. Just like Director Webb has a particular policy initiative, that board then votes on it, and it's approved. The chief executive officer then carries it out. So this board is a policy-making board. This board is not a management board. It only works on policy. And I'm assuming that is the intent of Director Campuris, is to have more policy discussions. Now, one might add that this is, as he shared, as far as I can remember, the agenda meeting is supposed to be that setting to do that. What Director Campuris is sharing, he believes over the past 20, 30 years that it may have not been the place based on his perspective. It's up to the board on that decision. We're going to do policy, whether it's at the agenda meeting or another meeting that the board wants to schedule. That's up for the board to decide if they want to have an additional meeting added to their calendar. But from what I understand from what Director Campuris is sharing is that he wants to tackle larger policy issues like the jail funding, like anything from that could be solar savings and things of that nature. That's fine to discuss it. We can discuss it here, and we can discuss it at another meeting. But that's anytime we assemble, we can discuss anything. But it has to be an official board meeting to legislate any policy through the vehicle of the City of Little Rock, which is ordinances and/or resolutions.
I'm sorry, I still have a green light. But I'm thinking that if we have these discussions, as per this agenda says, that we would be more prepared for things that come to the board than where we've been as of late on some items that have been brought forward. So just looking at this for face value, it seems like it might be a good idea. And in fact, I agree with Dean that, we go through the agenda items, and then at the end, we kind of trail off on what our own little agendas are and ask for information and have questions. So I think it's probably a good idea.
And just to share, that'll be most likely the exact same thing at another meeting. Individuals, based on what it says in this, that individuals will have the ability to bring forth their desires to be discussed. So again, I'm just want to make sure everyone is aware of what you are considering. And you guys will vote on it. If there has to be a tie, then I only vote on there. But just want to make sure everyone's aware.
Thank you.
Director Wright, it's next.
In theory, I agree that we need more policy discussions. I do not think that we need to add an hour and a half to our Tuesday board meetings. Feel that we can add that possibly or make it a component for open discussion during an agenda meeting, which is where we're supposed to discuss policy, rather than putting that additional burden on people that may not be able to get here at 4 o'clock on a Tuesday, that we're having a meeting that could last till 10 o'clock at night. So in theory, I agree, but I just think we can do an open discussion after we go through the existing agenda, have a discussion on various policies at the end of that meeting. Just add that to an agenda meeting.
And again, this is just for us to have a discussion in a week, and I just want to put it on the agenda to talk about in a week. That's all we're talking about.
Are we talking about it, or this looks like me, we're going to vote on it?
No, we're not doing, all I want to do is put it on the agenda.
But Director Campuris, if it's put on the agenda, it has to be voted on.
Well, it has to be voted on to put it on the agenda, not to do it.
Because at this point, I would be voting against this because I think that's too much.
Oh, one second. Tom, will you just share with the board? I think many know the process as we understand it right now. Due to the right of Director Campuris, he can put this on the agenda for, I guess that would be August the 6th. Can you walk through the process?
Well, yeah, you've got an ordinance in place about directors putting an item on the agenda as a matter of right. Because this has been brought forward, Director Campuris could have this on the agenda for the 13th and then at the regular meeting on the 20th without any action, just to have it on there. What he's going to do is to ask that this basically be part of the agenda on Tuesday night, as I understand it. That will take a simple majority vote at the time. It's like a modification. If he waited until Tuesday night to bring up this desire, then it would take an extraordinary vote of 8 members of the Board of Directors.
So again, he's sharing with you, he being Director Computers, he would like to discuss this on the board meeting. So this board, if you want to discuss it further than what you're discussing right now, you'll vote to put it on the agenda to be discussed again on August the 6th. And then after that's being discussed, per the desire of Director Computers, it will be voted on August the 20th. So at that point in time, you've heard it here today.
No, it would be voted on in a week.
That's what we're saying. So at one point you said you do not want to vote on next week?
I do want to, I want to put it on the agenda today so we vote on it next week. That's all.
Right, but
Actually-
you just shared that's not what you wanted.
Okay,
I'm confused.
yeah, we actually can't, quote, put it on the agenda today under our rules. But what we can do is everybody's noticed up that there's going to be a request to modify the agenda on Tuesday to add this matter for a vote and discussion on Tuesday.
Bruce, if you would like to share something.
No, I think Tom sort of cleared the muddy waters up. What Director Pierce is asking is that this item, that the board vote next Tuesday to add it to the August 6th agenda for discussion and action. The board will have to vote to add it by, as Tom said, simple majority. That's the ordinance that you all passed as far as how things can be added to the agenda absent the city manager. So in other words, if you all decide that you don't want to add it to the agenda, it will automatically be on the agenda based on you all's rules on August 13th for action on August the 20th.
Right.
Well, my opinion is this is a little much for a Tuesday night, 6 o'clock meeting to be here for an hour and a half for policy discussion that we could have on an agenda meeting night, which is what we're supposed to do. And as we go through, like tonight, once we through this, we might be out of here in 15 minutes. We could have another item on here that says open discussion. Board members can bring up items that they want to discuss, like the jail, okay, transit, anything, rather than having somebody required to be here at 4 o'clock on the night when they could be here from 6 to 9 or 6 to 10.
Doris, then let's just put it on and make the amendment in a week.
That's fine. We can do it that way. This is your thing. I'm just saying, as it is, I'm not in support.
And again, I'm not asking anybody to vote on it. All I want to do is just have a discussion about how we do policy better. That's all I want to do.
I agree, we
I
need to
think
do
we
something
shirk our responsibilities in what we do.
Well, why don't we just have it as a discussion item then instead of a resolution?
That's
Because I
fine.
really thought it was discussion as opposed to voting on a resolution.
That's fine. Whatever y'all want to do, it's fine.
So are we saying we want to discuss now or we want to discuss next week? Just, we'll come back to that, but that's a question. Director Hendricks.
I agree with Mr. Moore. I think he mentioned about August the 13th is when we should vote on this and not before. This was just thrown up in my face today, and I don't go for that kind of stuff.
Yes, ma'am. Director Webb.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. To follow up on what Vice Mayor Wyrick said a minute ago, and I love the idea of discussing the policy. When I first ran for the board, I remember looking at one of those budget books, and it had in there the duties of the board, and it talked about a board retreat, and where there was a list, and there's still lists of things that we must do, and then things that we would like to do, and then it had some priorities listed out. And for some of us, it won't be possible to come at 4 o'clock on these alternate weeks. But I would just throw out to add to the discussion, if Director Compuris is willing, that we consider the fact that since whatever discussion we have will be in a public setting, that we consider having another retreat like that one. I don't even know when it was, but I read about it in the budget book, and have sort of that overarching discussion of policy and our responsibilities, and then do what I think Director Wright said of having it when something specific comes up. We would have the framework from a retreat and then specific things. I'm glad Director Compuris brought it up. I think it's a great thing. There'll be a lot of citizens who can't come, and it will be very difficult for others of us, like myself, to come. Thank you.
Director Adcock?
Yes. I do not want another budget retreat. For the last 3 years, we have had them. I think it is not good for the city department heads. We ask them to come with wish lists and things that they want. They go through all this of looking at what do we want, and then after we pass our budget, we say, sorry, none of your items got into the budget. So I'm for one that I don't want another retreat where we have all the department heads telling us of all the wonderful things they could do and want to do, but then we pass a budget that doesn't include anything they want. Dean, on section 2, I would like to add to it that that 1 week before all written policy topics will be given to the mayor. That way staff will have time to look at our topics and to have some information for us. But I think this is a good idea. If this way we're coming at, if we do it after this meeting, if we say today at 4 o'clock we're doing this, and we will stay here until 5:30 looking at policy, instead of coming at the 6 o'clock meeting, which some people says they can't come at the 6 o'clock meeting, let's just stay after the agenda meeting until 5:30, and from whenever we finish the agenda until 5:30, we'll be here looking at the policy issues. So people who do not want to or cannot come at 4 o'clock on the 6 o'clock meeting, we'll say we're going to just flip it around, and at the 4 o'clock meeting, we're going to stay until 5:30, and after we get through with the agenda and all of our reports, like the financial reports, then we will discuss policy. So Dean, would that be, if we change that?
Yeah, all I want to do is have the opportunity to talk about issues that are specific, that are issues confronting this city, that I think we shirk our responsibilities by doing it. So I appreciate your thought, and I think it's a great one. I appreciate Doris's thought on it.
Mr. Carpenter, then for our discussion next week, would you please rewrite this for us that says that instead of coming at 4 to the 6 o'clock meeting, that at our 4 o'clock meeting, we'll be staying until 5:30, and under section 2, a week before the policy meeting, that all written policy topics be given to the mayor. Because it'll do us no good to sit here and discuss the jail or any other subject if we do not have the information that we need. And that would give the mayor's office a week to gather up the information that we want to look at.
Director Adcock, I'll be happy to write that language. I do want to suggest to the board that while we have a relatively small number of items on today's agenda, it's almost 5 o'clock. We're getting ready to get a significant financial report. We've had agenda meetings that have gone till 6. We call the 4 to 6 the Jesse Mason agenda meeting, because you particularly will remember the record is 2:30 a.m. for an agenda meeting. So my question is, do you want to make a time certain or a time period certain that after the agenda meeting we would have an hour and a half or an hour, whatever the amount is, for policy discussions, the topics get to the mayor
I would
in
like for you to
advance?
put until 6 o'clock unless the group votes to extend the time.
The problem with that is that you really don't vote in an agenda meeting.
Okay, let's put agree then,
Now, do
instead of
that.
vote. That we agree. Because if we're in the middle of a discussion, we may agree to stay a little bit later. But if we're not agreeable to it, then we can go ahead and leave.
That's what I'll do.
Thank you. Thank you, Dean.
Director Richardson?
Tom, quickly, now you said we need a simple majority to add this. Is that because it's a resolution, and if it was an ordinance, would it require 2/3?
No.
Why is this a simple majority as opposed to 2/3?
If the director brings the item to the attention of the manager or the city attorney before the agenda meeting, then they have a right at the next agenda meeting, if they want to have a vote, then it can come up at the next meeting as a simple majority. If they don't bring it up until at the beginning of the next meeting, it's supposed to be a 3/4 vote, 2/3 vote.
Got you. I don't know, Bruce, when you got it, but Dean, we just got this right in the middle of this conversation. And I too have a couple of questions. How are we defining policy? How are we quantifying policy? And how are we doing this in a proactive kind of way? Because I heard somebody say we have one thing come up and then we discuss that. So how are we, Dean, I think conceptually it's a great idea, but how are we defining policy without divorcing ourselves from specific projects and specific wards? And secondly, and probably more importantly, Mayor, you made some reference to 20-plus years. What, after 20-plus years, and Dean, I read in your letter, I didn't think it required a resolution, but what in the 20-plus years some of us have been serving up here makes this point in time the magical, majestical moment for us to have a process like this in place? So tell me what after 20-plus years making this point right now the magical, majestical moment for us to have this approach? Because when I read your letter, Dean, I thought it was an interesting perspective, and I didn't think we needed a resolution. I think it's something that we all need to agree or would agree to come to or not come to as we define policy, but I didn't think it needed a resolution for us to agree to this. Yes, I would like you to answer that. I mean, why now? I mean, we've been doing this.
He's asking a direct question.
I asked direct question. Yes, ma'am.
You got to do it again. You had it on.
Well, it's reflection on what we do and don't do. It's reflection on what our job is. It's an admission, at least, that I wrote in that letter that I thought I was not doing my job. It's an admission that you have said multiple times, just to take up one issue, that we're not doing a good job in fighting crime. It's a admission, as you have said many times, that we spend almost $6 million on PIT. We have a summer youth program where we employ people. We have a summer play program. We have all of those things, but we never sit down as a board and talk about all the issues together and how do we make it better. And if we look at honestly what we do, then in my opinion, we're not utilizing the resources that this city has to improve this city. And then you can talk about crime, you can talk about community centers, you can talk about the jail, you can talk about any of the health programs. All of those things are hard issues to talk about. They require a lot of thought, and it is an admission on my part that I don't think that I'm doing a good job. So I'm offering this as a way of trying to make the city better. Now, you could say to me, what the hell have you done for the last 20-something years, and why haven't you done this? But I looked at this as I sat down and really tried to focus on what's going on, that we have systemic problems that we try to address piecemeal, and we don't do a good job of looking at a holistic approach to it. We spend a lot of money on mediocrity, and I think it's our job to be honest with ourselves, be honest with the citizens, and look at what we're doing and try to make a difference in what we're doing. And when Charles is in the legislature, they have a problem, and what do? They have a study committee for 2 years to look at it to try to come up with a better answer. And all I'm asking us to do is to take the time and effort to look at big problems we have and make our city better. If we continue doing the same thing the same way and we expect a different outcome, shame on us.
Dean, just real quickly, Mayor Dean, you're one of my few friends I have up here. Thankfully, I'm thankful of that. But I guess my point, and I agree with you conceptually, but you made reference to what I've been saying. I've been saying that for over 10 years without any action, any movement. And my question was, what makes this the magical, majestical moment? Because I've also said quite often, Dean, a lot of times, unfortunately, it centers on the messenger rather than the message. And I agree, I have been saying these things for 10 years, and I guess my question is, what's making right now that magical, majestical moment? I think you wrote a wonderful letter. I like and agree with a lot of points you made, and I see where we're going, but how are we...
Because, Ken, here's the deal. None of us on here would agree that we have a perfect city, and at least I'm willing to admit that I'm not doing the job I should be doing. And you can't do, if I see a patient and you come in to see me and I don't look at all aspects of your health and your care and what the problems are, then I can't make a good decision on how to take care of you. And why should I do all day long and follow that principle and not follow it here? And all of us know that we're not doing the city's not what it should be. Frank campaigned on that. We've all talked about that. So why don't we be honest about it? Find a time where we can discuss issues, decide how we're going to spend our money, understand where the pitfalls are. We're going to be hit, I think, with a huge increase in our budget in healthcare probably. Where's that money going to come from? Should we know it in August, or should we know it in November when the mayor brings a budget to us? What are we going to do about the jail?
So, Dean, I'll have to respectfully interject. I understand, again, in the most respectful way to the entire board. I understand what you're talking about, Dean. I can't account for what the city board has done the last 24, 26 years. What I can assure you as the state's chief elected officer and executive officer, that I campaign on change. I think for the last 210 days, I think everyone can attest that City Hall has changed and will continue to, as it relates to very strategic discussions that this board has to come before. For instance, part of the body is that myself, Sarah Linehan, and Bruce have to work together on a budget, just like we did for the budget amendment. One of the things that we do know is historically the board has not been brought in what one could see early enough, or did not go into much of a deep dive. That's one of the things I've already shared. That'll be a change in how Sarah, Bruce, and I kind of move forward, where we'll have strategic discussions about the upcoming budget that has to be decided upon in December. So that's number one. Number two, the jail funding. Clearly, that's a big issue. That's something that Sarah, Bruce, and myself, again, the management team, has been working on for the past 3 or 4 months with not only ourselves, but the mayors of North Little Rock, Jacksonville, and all the other mayors within the Pulaski County. Again, I think this particular type of issue does encroach upon, governance issues. We can discuss all day during the agenda meeting and/or a meeting that we want to add to on another day. But that's fine. But we do have to understand that discussions are sometimes discussions. That one will adhere to what's part of that in that learning. But that's what I want to make certain that we're all aware of.
Well, Mayor, here's my last point, and Dean, I think I said, just real quickly.
Hey, Ken, Director Hendricks has been waiting.
Come on. The thing that I want to say, and Dean said it, 21 years, this city has sat here, I don't know which adjective I would like to use, but we have a new mayor who is the chief executive officer of this board. And I think that all of you need to recognize that. My thing has been, the downfall of this board has been the at-large positions. I don't care. It's not legal. I attempted to do something about that last year, but it took time and money and effort. you first got to educate these people. But I have problems with Dean coming here handing this to me and to all of us at the last minute and thinking that we're going to vote on it. And I'm your friend, you know, but I'm going to speak the truth, whether you like it or not. That's for all of you. And I think that until we realize, I'm being redundant, that Mayor Frank Scott is the CEO of this board. And it seems that we've forgotten that, you know, we just, and you know, I'll talk to Tom tonight on the telephone, but we need to be about business, okay?
Dave, I think we had enough discussion on this matter. Our chief financial officer is going to come present us on a very serious topic on our first quarter financials. I hope everyone makes certain to pay special attention.
Good afternoon, Mayor, members of the board, City Manager. I've continued the format that we've traditionally seen for our quarterly reports, but I have considered and would welcome suggestions if you'd like to see some of the information combined like we do in the CAFR as well at times to have a better understanding of how this will look when it gets to audit time, if you'd like for me to add a schedule like that in the future. On the first slide, we've got our revenue for the first quarter of the year. Currently, when we do our budget, we divide our budgeted numbers ratably by 12 to get the monthly budget. First quarter would be 25% of our revenues anticipated. We had achieved 27.61% of our revenues through the end of March compared to 26.34% the same period a year ago. When you look at that by dollars on the next slide, with our budget, 25% of our revenue budget excluding transfers would be $50,560,000. We had achieved $55,846,000 compared to $52,991,000 the same period a year ago. On the next slide, you'll see this broken down by category, and as you all are aware, our revenues do not come in ratably throughout the year. Our general property taxes on line 1, we receive approximately 40% of those revenues in April, and then we receive the largest bulk, around 60%, towards the end of the year in November. The March report does include the accrual for what we receive in revenue, and so with that being 40% as opposed to 25% of our annual budget, we always exceed revenue in the first quarter in property taxes. It is comparable to the same period a year ago. Our property tax original charge that we received from the county in February after the budget's adopted came in at 3.62% above what it was previous year. Our budget estimate was 4%, so we're pretty close, and that compares to just I believe it was just 1.5% last year. Excuse me. So that's a positive change. Our sales taxes, while they appear to be below budget, again, the timing of our sales tax revenues increases quite a bit in the fourth quarter. We have a heavier load on our sales tax revenues. We are exceeding the same period a year ago, and I'll go into a lot of detail on that on the following slides. Licenses and permits of our annual budget, almost $6.9 million of the license and permit budget is associated with annual business licenses. Those are always due by January 1st. So we receive the majority of that revenue in either December of the previous year, defer it for recognition till January, or in January and February of the current year. Through the end of March, we had received approximately 88% of our annual business license budget. The remaining part of licenses and permits has to do with our mixed drink supplemental charges and then also the planning permits. Our planning permits are trailing the budget a year ago by about 15.3%, and that is because last year during the first quarter there were several large permits pulled associated with the construction of Southwest High School. But we are on track for what we anticipate our annual budget to be. Intergovernmental revenues on line 4, those are received annually in midsummer. So you'll see in the year-to-date and the prior year, 0, because that comes in one lump sum in the middle of July. Investment income, I'm going to talk about, well, charges for services. The primary variance there just has to do with the timing of some of our reimbursements on crossing guards in Little Rock School District. School resource officers, we split that charge with the school district. The golf, zoo, parks revenues are very close to the same period a year ago, very little variance there. Fines and fee revenue is in line. Utility franchise fees, I'll talk about that in detail in a moment. A lot of the decrease there in comparison to the same period a year ago has to do with the timing of that Tax Cut and Jobs Act. You'll recall it did not go into effect until April of last year. So we're comparing to a first quarter last year before those reductions and credits came into effect. Investment income. Each year, at the end of the year, we have to do a fair market value adjustment that we accrue. It's based on the value of our investments, which are held to maturity by a matter of policy. So we don't normally actually experience a lot of swing with the market. But our realized investment income was forecast to be $391,200 for the year. We're right on track with our quarterly realized revenue. The remaining $220,000, which is about the amount of the variance, is due to the reversal of that fair market value adjustment at year end, and we have that at the end of each year. The big variance that is not due to just normal timing of revenues is in our miscellaneous line. Little Rock Convention and Visitors Bureau voted at the end of December last year that they wanted to retire the 2016 note that they took out for the Cromwell building through the city. They reimbursed the city for those payments. The city took out the note. They decided they wanted to retire that early. When we do short-term notes, we always include in the terms of the note that we have the right to prepay without penalty. So Little Rock Convention and Visitors Bureau elected to do that in January. They transferred the amount to the city that would be required to make that early retirement, so there's an offset in our debt expense that you'll see in a moment. But the net impact of this to the city's general fund is nothing. There's no impact. Okay, on the next slide, you see the comparison of our year-to-date revenues for the first quarter to the same quarter a year ago. And as I just mentioned, our general property tax original charge came in 3.56% above the same or above last year. I'm going to talk to you about sales taxes and utility franchise fees separately. The other variances we've already discussed. On the next slide, you'll see our sales tax. So these are the sales tax results through the first quarter. What we have received in March, April, and May represents our January through March revenues. The city, the receipts actually increased 6.36% blended in January, 4.04% for February, and 3.36% for March. So they decreased 3.36% for March. So we had 2 months of increase, 6.36 and 4.04% blended, with a decrease of 3.36% in March. Year to date, the city portion of the sales tax has increased 2.59%, so that's the tax that the city levies locally. Then we receive a portion of the county sales tax based on our population. That, through the end of the first quarter, has grown 1.47%. So the combined blended sales tax growth for the first quarter is 2.05%. The adopted budget requires growth of 1.52%. It's important when evaluating kind of where we are with our annual budget. We look back the previous 12 months and see what the growth has been over a 12-month period, and that's at 1.47%. So we're pretty close to our projected growth rate of 1.52% over the past 12 months. The next slide just summarizes the county and the city and the turn back together. These are the numbers I just reported. January growth of 6.36%, February growth of 4.04%, and a reduction in comparison to March a year ago of 3.36%. On the next slide, you see this by month. Important things to look at. We are 2% above the same period a year ago in our growth. We're 0.5% better than our budgeted growth of 1.52%. On the next slide, you'll see the sales tax that's been generated with the 1 cent tax over the life of the tax. So in the current year, we've collected $12.2 million associated with that tax, of which $7.6 million goes to general fund operations, the 5/8 cent portion. The 3/8 cent portion, which is just under $5 million, goes to the capital projects fund. Life to date, the tax has brought in $352 million, of which $220 has funded operations, and $132.2 million has gone to those special projects. You'll see up above on our increase over the same period a year ago, this is just the local tax now without considering, the county piece that you see in the general fund. It's grown at 2.59% over the same period a year ago. On the next slide, we're going to talk about our utility franchise fees. So last year when I was up here before you in the first quarter, we had just unbelievable results, and you see that on lines 5, 6, and 7. We were up 17%, 21.8%, and 12.3% last year at this time. Well, that was a combination of increased usage, which you see, but it was also the impact of rate increases that the Public Service Commission had passed. Energy had given us that information. We had built it into our budget. Right about the time our budget was passed, the federal government passed the Tax Cut and Jobs Act. And so our governor asked the utilities to go back to the Public Service Commission, justify those rates, whether or not they were still required for cost recovery because they were getting significant federal income tax benefits that was reducing their overall burden. So as a result, Energy reversed the rate increases and also started applying credits to customer bills. Beginning in April, when that was implemented, we started seeing reductions in comparison to the same period a year ago of about 17%. Well, this year, we've got two things going on. We have reduced usage, so our winter was not quite as cold as the same period a year ago. And we're also comparing to the period prior to that rate increase or rate reduction taking effect. So our revenues currently are about 13% below where they were the first quarter last year. They're about $425,000 less than the same period a year ago. And they're about $313,000 below budget when you just look at our annual budget and divide by, 4 quarters. However, as we move forward in the year and we're comparing to a period where rates are somewhat comparable, we should start seeing that mitigate somewhat. Also, it's important to know that the tax credits that have been applied to customer bills for commercial customers and industrial customers, those ended in December 2018. The credits continue on residential bills through December 2019. And then the retroactive credits go away. But the impact of the tax cuts and the reduced rates stay in effect unless they go back and get a rate increase approved. On the next slide, you see the gas revenues. Gas was a little slower to react to the Tax Cut and Jobs Act. They did not implement their reductions until June of last year. Once again, with the much colder weather and the rate increases that had been approved, we were seeing unbelievable results first quarter last year. This year we have a combination of reduced usage and the rate comparison to the first quarter last year before the rates had taken into effect. So we're currently at about 11% below the same period a year ago, with a decrease in usage at 4.03%. Revenues are approximately 189,000 below the same period last year, but we're only about 26,000 off of our budget. One of the things that both of these numbers, by the way, for our annual budget did come directly from the utilities. We used the numbers that they provided to us. We estimated $14 million for the annual budget for our electric utility and $3,157,000 for our gas utility. Their formula plan was approved. They did get a rate adjustment that began in October that was approved that increased rates slightly. The credits, though, expire in February 2019 for customers. So you'll notice beginning in March, we do see positive comparison, but we also had a pretty good increase in usage. So I think we'll be able to see it a little bit better as we move forward in the year. On the next slide, so I guess back to my original revenue slide, our franchise fees are about $700,000 to $800,000 below where they were first quarter last year. The biggest components of that are these two, the energy and the CenterPoint. But that should that comparison should get better as we move forward with the rate reductions having gone into effect last year about this time. On the expenditures, again, with 25% of the budget, we had expended 24.25% of our annual budget in comparison to 23.10% the same period a year ago. I didn't say it before, but all of the numbers you're looking at are in comparison to the original adopted budget. We will put into the financial reports beginning with June, because the amendment was adopted in June. That's when you will begin to see the comparison to the amended budget that you adopted. So the expenditures were approximately $1.5 million below budget and $3 million above the same period a year ago. The budget, the first quarter budget would have been $50,247,678. We had expended $48,747,000 compared to $45,729,000 the same period a year ago. On the next slide, you'll see it by department. So really, there were no significant, when we do our variance memo that we send out to the board, the criteria is $50,000 or 5% variance from budget. None of the revenue or none of the expenditure lines actually met that criteria with the exception of the debt service. I will point out just a couple of them, the negative variances that we usually talk about. In traffic on line 7, the city has a contract for services with the county for a deputy public defender. That payment is due every year in January, so we always see that negative variance the first part of the year. The annual contract is $51,168. On golf, we have a negative $55,000 variance. There, you'll recall that we only adopted a budget for First Tee for the first quarter of the year, knowing that we had the golf study going on, and we expended that full budget in the first quarter. This looked at it as though it were an annual budget, which is creating that variance. Otherwise, golf actually had a favorable variance of $34,000 during the first quarter. Police has a large favorable variance of $2.6 million, but $2.1 million of that has to do with the timing of the closed pension plan funding, the timing of those payments. We get billed a monthly amount that we contribute, and then at the end of the year, we true up for all of the revenue, the dedicated property tax levy, the $1 million city sales tax contribution, and then their portion of fines and fees. And so that's just a timing issue, and that's $2.1 million of the variance. The remaining $574 is truly being under budget, and a lot of that has to do with fuel and repairs and things that have not yet occurred. On the principal and interest line, that's where you see there were actually 2 short-term financing notes that were retired in January. One was the city's 2014 note that would have retired in 2019 anyway. And then the other was the Little Rock Convention and Visitors Bureau note that I mentioned. And so that variance was entirely offset by the contribution they made to cover the payment. On the next slide, we'll talk about our vacancies. The original adopted budget included a $5.5 million vacancy savings estimate. Through the end of March, we had achieved $1.5 million of that annual requirement. There were 111 budgeted positions that were unfilled in the general fund at the end of the first quarter. Of those, 7 were uniform police officer positions, and there were 5 higher level uniform positions, 4 sergeants and the chief at that time. The vacation payouts, we increased the annual budget to $1,250,000. We had expended $221,372 through the end of March. The payout that was associated with the former mayor actually was accrued back to the previous year. So it will not, because it was for service that occurred prior to December 31st. So you will not see that here. It was actually reflected in our 2018 financials. On the next slide, we've got kind of the count of positions. We had reached 144 vacant positions by the end of December. We had 122 in January. We have started 2 recruit schools. There was a recruit school for police. We had a lot of retirements, but a recruit school of 25 police officers began on the 18th of February. I just mentioned that there were 7 officer positions vacant at the end of March, and then 4 higher level and the chief. We also had a fire recruit school that began on March 4th. They were down actually about 20 some positions due to retirements, but they started a recruit class of 36 on March 4th, and that includes the 12 positions required for Station 24. So those, we've already got the additional headcount on board in recruit schools so that we'll have enough positions ready to go when the station opens. And so that concludes the first quarter financial report. Are there any questions? Thank you.
Director Adcock?
Sarah,
Yes, ma'am.
when you reported that we had a $34,000 increase in golf on the slide just a few minutes ago. So
I said they were 34,000 under budget with the exception of the timing of the first tee
They
contributions.
was under budget. So was there not an emergency to close 2 golf courses?
This is for the quarter. The budget amendment you took into effect, the city, we had a lot of one-time revenues, as we discussed, that were part of making this budget. We also had temporary reductions in expenditures that were part of adopting this budget. An example was the Art Center funding. There were things that we reduced temporarily or that we used other sources to do. In part of this budget, transfers in, we've got transfer in from the fleet fund of $750,000. We have transfers from closing projects. Those are not sustainable ongoing things to sustain our ongoing operating budget. So that was the impetus for the budget amendment. The golf issue was one that was brought up last year during our meetings with the board in September when we were talking about our annual planning and the fact that we were spending anywhere from, $2 million to more on golf a year, and whether or not the demand required, and that was net of revenues over, or expenditures over revenues, if that was something that the city should be investing taxpayer funds in
I guess
in
my
the long
problem
run.
is this looks to me like a pretty good financial report. And yet I'm going back a few months ago whenever we was all in a fizzy that, we were so far behind and everything. So then look at this good report today that you've presented.
Well, and again, as I mentioned, we should, and as I said when we did the presentations back in April, May, and June, We adopted a balanced budget that would get us through the current year and that alone because of the one-time revenues and expenditures that are included in it. It was not a budget. We would have been faced with massive reductions next year, not only to adjust for the fact that we had the one-time money in the current year budget, but also for those things on the horizon that we've talked about, the healthcare, the jail contract, additional public safety expenditures and other things that are coming forward. So we had both of those things that we had to address. So what we did was right-size the budget to ensure that our ongoing revenues match our ongoing operating expenses.
When would the second group budget be done?
Second
Which would
group.
be April, May, June. When will you have that complete to us?
We have April's financials in review right now. We're working very quickly to try to catch up on everything. We just got our May sales tax results. Y'all should have received a memo last week or earlier this week on that, maybe even yesterday. On the sales tax results that Laura sent out, but we do not have any of our revenues for June in yet.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions?
No other questions regarding our first quarter financials? Seeing none, we'll take care of our appointments at the next board meeting. We'll see everyone. Meeting is adjourned. Oh, I'm sorry. I am sorry. Director Hendricks.
This is for Mr. Moore. Mr. Moore, I am waiting for a response from either you or Eckhart. You don't have to do that verbally. If you would just email me, because I emailed you the event at the park on. Yeah, you did. Yeah. Okay. I don't sit in front of that thing all day. I'll go back to it. Thank you.
Meeting adjourned.